Imagine you are holding a piece of bronze in your hands. Just picture it. It's severely corroded, it's tinted this sickly green color, and it is completely covered in 20 centuries of calcified marine life.
Oh, yeah. It honestly just looks like a heavy, misshapen rock, like something with patches of mold on it.
Exactly. It's
Right.
ugly. And, you know, this heavily degraded lump is from the time of the ancient Greeks, so we're talking roughly 2,000 years ago.
Right.
But here is the catch. Inside this completely unassuming encrusted mass of metal is a fully functional, breathtakingly precise analog computer.
It's just wild to even say out loud.
It really is.
Yeah.
It's a mechanical device so unimaginably complex, packed with interlocking gear trains and spiral dials, that this level of engineering simply wouldn't be seen again on Earth until, what, the medieval clockwork of European cathedrals?
Yeah, like 1,000 years later.
A full millennium.
The mere existence of this object, it completely demands that we rewrite the timeline of human technological progress. I mean, according to the traditional linear narrative of how our ancestors developed machinery, this device is a complete impossibility. It shouldn't exist.
Well, welcome to our deep dive. Today, our mission is to explore the mystery, the totally accidental discovery, and the mind-bending inner workings of the Antikythera mechanism.
Yes.
We're going a long way back. We're starting with a violent storm and a Roman-era shipwreck in the Mediterranean, and we'll eventually end up in the basement of modern museums.
Which is where researchers have spent decades piecing together how ancient humans managed to physically map the cosmos using hand-cut bronze.
To guide this exploration, we are pulling together threads from some incredible reporting. We'll be weaving in historical context from History.com, archaeological updates from Live Science, deep dive feature pieces from the Smithsonian, and, foundational data that maps out the raw mathematical mechanics of the device itself.
It's a massive stack of sources, but it's all necessary.
It is. And I want to set the table right out of the gate here. Because this artifact is so profoundly out of place in our accepted history, it has generated an entire cottage industry of wild fringe theories.
Well, the alien theories.
Right. Most notably that it was dropped here by ancient aliens.
Mm-hmm.
But we are going to look strictly at the hardware, the math, and the history. The real human truth behind this dense lump of bronze is vastly more impressive than any science fiction story.
I totally agree. The human element is what makes it resonate so deeply, you know? Think about the modern era for a moment. We just assume our technological progress is this unbroken upward trajectory.
Yeah, it's a great lineup.
Right. We went from the wheel to simple water mills to the steam engine, all the way up to our current digital cloud. But this single, dense mechanism proves that human ingenuity can reach staggering, towering heights, only to be completely wiped out and forgotten.
It's terrifying, actually.
It is, because if our modern civilization were to collapse tomorrow, our digital hard drives and cloud servers would rot into nothing within a few decades. They'd leave barely a trace of our genius. But this bronze device survived for 2 millennia to tell its story.
And the fact that it survived at all is, well, it's nothing short of a mathematical miracle. To truly understand the gravity of this mechanism, we have to look at the incredibly narrow window of sheer luck that brought it to the surface.
You really do.
We need to go back to the spring of the year 1900.
So the Mediterranean in 1900 was heavily trafficked, but the sea itself was entirely unforgiving. You've got this crew of Greek sponge divers from the island of Sami.
Right.
And they were making a routine commercial voyage en route to the coast of North Africa.
They were harvesting natural sea sponges, which was a highly lucrative but incredibly dangerous industry at the time.
Very dangerous. And they encountered a massive, violent storm midway through their journey. So to keep their ship from being torn apart, the captain was forced to alter course and seek emergency shelter.
Near this tiny, barren, and rocky Greek island called Antikythera.
Exactly. Which is situated in the treacherous waters roughly between the Greek mainland and the island of Crete.
So they were anchored there, right, just waiting out the squall. And eventually the waters calmed down enough that they decided to make the most of their detour.
Right. Time is money.
Exactly. So they send divers down to the seabed to see if there are any valuable sponges to salvage while they wait.
But instead of a bed of sponges, the first diver to hit the seafloor stumbled onto a massive debris field.
A Roman shipwreck.
Yes, dating back to roughly 60 BC.
We really need to pause here and look at the terrifying mechanics of deep-sea diving in the year 1900. Because these men were not floating around in modern, lightweight scuba gear.
Oh, absolutely not.
The sources paint a grim picture of their equipment. They were wearing standard diving dress, These heavy, restrictive canvas dry suits bolted into primitive, massive brass helmets.
With air being manually pumped down to them through a long rubber hose from the deck of the ship.
The conditions were just brutal. They were operating at a depth of roughly 45 meters, or about 150 feet.
At that depth, the water pressure is crushing, literally crushing.
And the concept of decompression sickness, what we call the bends, was barely understood back then.
Right, because nitrogen bubbles would form in their blood if they surfaced too quickly. And because the suits were so incredibly cumbersome, they could only remain at the bottom for about 5 minutes per dive.
5 minutes.
Yeah, 5 minutes before they had to be hauled back up.
So you have to imagine the physical and psychological toll on these guys. You are trapped in a dark canvas suit, breathing stale air pumped through a rubber hose, peering through a tiny, fogged-up glass porthole into the murky, blue-black depths of the Mediterranean.
Sounds like a nightmare.
And suddenly, a shape looms out of the darkness. The history article includes this incredible, vivid detail. The first diver was hauled back to the surface in an absolute state of panic.
He ripped off his helmet, right?
Yeah, he ripped it off and told the captain he had just seen a, quote, heap of dead naked people, end quote, lying scattered across the ocean floor.
The diver's panic is completely understandable given the poor visibility down there. Because what he had actually seen wasn't a mass grave.
No.
It was a spectacular, sprawling collection of marble and bronze statues.
Right.
The Roman ship had been a massive cargo vessel. It was essentially a floating luxury transport carrying looted or purchased Greek art and high-end goods back to Rome.
So once word gets back to the authorities, the Greek government dispatches a naval gunboat to protect the site from looters. And over the next 10 months, these sponge divers conduct a grueling, systematic salvage operation.
Which was incredibly dangerous work.
Oh, totally. But they pull up unbelievable treasures. Beautifully preserved bronze figures, intricate glassware, ancient ceramics, furniture pieces, and gold jewelry. The international press goes absolutely wild for it.
Well, humans are naturally drawn to the shiny and the recognizable. The marble statues and the golden earrings immediately took center stage in the National Archaeological Museum in Athens. But mixed in with all of those breathtaking artifacts, the divers had also hauled up an incredibly heavy, heavily corroded lump of bronze.
And nobody cared about it.
No one.
It was ignored by the press, it was ignored by the public, and frankly, it was ignored by the researchers.
Yeah.
It was just a greenish, calcified chunk of debris, roughly the size of a large dictionary.
It's just a shoebox of rock.
Yeah. It gets boxed up, sent to the museum, and dumped in an unlit storage area. I mean, the greatest technological marvel of the ancient world was literally treated like a piece of garbage.
The psychology of that moment is fascinating, really. If something doesn't fit our immediate understanding of value, we just filter it out.
We don't even see it.
Exactly. The lump sat in that museum for 2 years, slowly drying out in the open air, its internal structure shrinking and cracking.
Then we hit the year 1902. A Greek politician and archaeologist named Valerios Stias happens to be visiting the museum.
Yeah.
He is wandering through the collections, inspecting the salvage goods, and his eyes land on this discarded, fractured lump.
Because the bronze had dried and cracked open?
Yes, the internal layers were suddenly exposed. And as Stace looks closer, he notices something that makes his blood run cold. Embedded perfectly in the side of this rock are precise, coin-sized gear wheels.
To understand why that was such a shock, you really have to look at the academic consensus of 1902.
What were they thinking back then?
Historians firmly believe that the ancient Greeks only possessed the ability to craft very crude, massive wooden gears. You know, the kind you would use to grind grain in a watermill or lift heavy weights.
Like big, chunky wooden pegs.
Exactly. The idea of delicate, precision-cut bronze gear wheels existing before the birth of Christ was considered absolutely impossible.
I try to imagine the cognitive dissonance Stace must have felt. You know, you were looking at an artifact from an ancient Roman shipwreck, and sticking out of the side of it is a piece of machinery that looks like the inside of an 18th century pocket watch.
It breaks your brain.
It's like excavating the tomb of a medieval knight, opening the sarcophagus, and finding an integrated circuit board resting on the knight's chest. Your brain simply rejects the visual information.
But Stace didn't just see gears. That's the crazy part.
Right. He saw tiny bits of ancient Greek text carved into the metal, specifically referencing the sun and the planet Venus.
And that text is what officially anchored the device to antiquity. It proved this wasn't just some modern clock that had somehow fallen off a passing ship and fused to the ancient wreck.
Because people probably assume that.
Oh, for sure. But the text meant it was authentically, undeniably Greek. But this realization immediately presented the museum curators with a massive problem.
How do you get inside it?
Yes. How do you study an intricate machine that is completely fused together by 2 millennia of seawater, corrosion, and pressure?
You can't just take a hammer and chisel to it.
No, the bronze had essentially turned into brittle stone. If you try to pry the gears apart, you will shatter the greatest archaeological discovery of the century into dust.
So the only option was patience. The researchers literally had to wait for human technology to catch up to the artifact. They had to wait for the invention of tools capable of looking inside solid matter.
Which means we enter a long, dark period of absolute puzzlement. For decades, researchers could only stare at the outside of the fragments and make educated guesses.
And most of those early guesses assumed it was a standard astrolabe.
Right. An astrolabe was a known historical instrument used by astronomers and navigators to measure the altitude of stars and planets.
It's a flat disc with a rotating arm.
Right. Yeah, very useful, but mechanically quite simple. It involves no complex gear trains. So assuming the lump was an astrolabe was a safe, conservative guess that didn't threaten the established historical timeline.
But around 1905, a German philologist named Albert Rehm traveled to Athens, and he spent time scrutinizing the faint microscopic inscriptions on the device.
Rehm was brilliant. He was the first academic to publicly hypothesize that this was not a simple passive sighting tool like an astrolabe.
He argued that the gears meant it was an active calculating machine, an ancient mechanical computer.
Yes, but his hypothesis, while correct, couldn't be proven physically. It wasn't until the 1950s and 70s that the first major technological leap occurred.
Enter Derek de Solla Price.
Exactly. A British physicist and historian of science. Price decided that guessing was no longer sufficient. He wanted to see the internal structure. So he commissioned the very first radiographic X-rays of the fragments.
Price's work was totally foundational. He took the device into the realm of modern physics. But we have to explain the limitation of 1970s X-ray technology here.
Right, it wasn't perfect.
When you X-ray a dense lump of corroded bronze, you're essentially projecting a 2D shadow of a 3D object onto a piece of film.
Just flat shadows.
Yeah. And because there are dozens of gears stacked on top of each other inside the lump, the resulting X-ray image is just a chaotic, overlapping mess of shadows. You can see that there are gears, but you can't tell which gear is connected to which axle.
The overlapping shadows meant Price had to do a lot of guesswork. I mean, he determined the fundamental blueprint. He figured out that the original device was housed in a wooden box with dials on the front and back.
Which was huge.
It was. But his specific attempts to reconstruct the exact mathematical gear ratios were deeply flawed. The resolution simply wasn't there.
To truly decode the machine, researchers needed to see it in 3 dimensions without physically touching it. So we jump forward to the early 2000s, and this is where the investigation enters the realm of science fiction.
We meet Tony Freeth.
Yes, Tony Freeth, a mathematician and filmmaker, and the University College London, or UCL, Antikythera research team.
Freeth realized that standard medical X-rays or basic hospital CT scanners were never going to penetrate the dense, calcified shell of the mechanism.
Why is that? Just too dense?
Yeah, the physical properties of corroded bronze and calcified marine rock are so similar in density that standard hospital imaging software couldn't distinguish between a gear tooth and a piece of seashell. So the UCL team partnered with an imaging company called X-Tech Systems to build a custom solution.
They designed and constructed an 8-ton, state-of-the-art 3D microfocus CT scanner, and they named the machine Blade Runner.
Which is such a cool name.
It is. But because the Greek authorities strictly forbade the fragile artifact from leaving the museum, the team had to figure out how to physically transport this 8-ton beast across Europe and squeeze it into the basement of the National Archaeological Museum in Athens.
The logistics alone were a nightmare, but the effort paid off in unimaginable ways. The Blade Runner scanner operated at a fundamentally different power level than anything used in a medical setting.
Freeth actually noted that the X-ray source was so incredibly powerful that if a living human being were to step inside the machine while it was running, the radiation would be instantly fatal.
It would kill them instantly. They bathed this ancient bronze in massive amounts of radiation to digitally slice it into microscopic layers.
And by mapping the exact density of every cubic millimeter, the software could virtually peel away the sea rock and the corrosion,
leaving only a perfect 3D digital model of the surviving metal.
The scans revealed that the original device had shattered into 82 distinct fragments, And nestled within those 82 pieces were 30 surviving bronze gears.
And we really need to talk about the physical craftsmanship revealed by those scans because it is staggering. We are not talking about the chunky, crude iron wheels you'd see in a medieval windmill.
No, not at all.
The gear teeth were cut with geometric perfection. Each individual tooth measured barely a millimeter long.
A millimeter? That's microscopic.
Yeah. The level of precision engineering required to cut teeth that small and ensure they mesh perfectly without jamming is something historians didn't believe humans achieved until the golden age of Swiss watchmaking in the 18th century.
It rewrites the entire history of mechanical engineering.
Totally.
Now, I have to play skeptic for a moment here.
Go for it.
The sources clearly state that the 82 fragments and 30 surviving gears represent roughly 1/3 of the original device. The rest of it is just gone.
Lost to the sea.
Right. Even Jacques Cousteau, the legendary oceanographer, went down to the Antikythera shipwreck site in the 1970s to search for the missing pieces and came up completely empty.
He found nothing.
So if we were missing more than half the machine, how can researchers confidently claim to know what the whole thing did? Aren't they just filling in the blanks with modern assumptions?
The skepticism is completely warranted, and it was the central hurdle for the UCL team. How do you finish a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle when you only have 300 pieces?
Right.
The breakthrough came from a hidden feature the CT scans revealed. The device contained its own user manual.
A user manual.
Yeah. Etched into the front and back bronze doors of the mechanism, doors that originally protected the dials, were thousands of tiny text characters in ancient Greek.
Oh, wow.
And the CT scans allowed researchers to read these hidden inscriptions for the first time. The text explicitly described what the dials on the front and back were supposed to display.
That's incredible.
It listed the planets, the cycles, and the specific astronomical events the machine tracked.
So the text is basically telling them the desired output of the machine. Like, this dial tracks the orbit of Mars.
Exactly. The researchers combined the textual descriptions of the output with the mathematical realities of the surviving input gears.
Give me an example of how that works.
Well, if you know you have a gear with 63 teeth turning a gear with 38 teeth, you can calculate the mathematical ratio of that movement.
Okay, that makes sense.
By tracking those ratios, they could logically deduce the precise size and tooth count of the missing gears required to produce the results described in the manual. They literally use math to reconstruct the missing mechanics.
That is a phenomenal piece of detective work. They use the absolute laws of geometry to resurrect the ghosts of the missing gears.
Beautifully put.
And thanks to that reverse engineering, we can now vividly visualize the interface of this ancient computer. We know what it looked like when a Greek scholar actually stood in front of it and used it.
Right. The reconstructed mechanism was roughly the size of a standard mantel clock. It was encased in a wooden box, perhaps finished with decorative bronze pleating.
And protruding from the side of the wooden case was the primary input device, which was just a simple hand-turned crank or knob.
When you grip that knob and turn it, you are stepping into the role of a god. You are physically driving time forward or backward.
As the crank rotates, it engages the main drive wheel, which cascades through the complex trains of epicyclic gears inside the box. And that eventually moves at least 7 distinct hands across the beautifully decorated dials on the outside.
Let's examine the front dial first, which served as the display of the heavens.
Okay.
The front face of the device featured a single, large, concentric dial. This dial tracked the real-time positions of the sun, the moon, and the 5 planets visible to the naked eye in antiquity.
Which would be Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn.
Exactly. It mapped their movement through the constellations of the zodiac.
And the aesthetics of this interface were stunning. We know from the translated inscriptions that the Greeks didn't just use boring metal pointers.
No, they wanted it to be visually striking.
Right. The hands of the dial carried the tiny spherical gemstones or colored glass to represent the celestial bodies. A fiery red stone tracked Mars, while a brilliant gold sphere represented the sun.
The visual feedback was immediate and striking, but perhaps the most mechanically beautiful feature on the front dial was the lunar phase indicator.
Oh, I love this part.
It wasn't just a flat hand, it was a tiny physical ball painted half silver and half black.
And through an incredibly clever arrangement of internal rotating crown gears, this ball would physically spin on its axis as it moved around the dial.
Which is just genius.
Showing the user the exact waxing and waning phases of the moon as it would appear in the sky that very night.
It is a literal handheld planetarium. You turn the crank, and the entire solar system dances in front of you.
But if the front dial was dedicated to mapping the vastness of the heavens, the back of the mechanism was dedicated to bringing that cosmic data down to Earth.
Yes, the back dials tracked time and society.
And the layout on the back is fundamentally different from the front.
Right. Instead of standard circular clock faces, the back featured two massive outward winding spiral dials.
The best analogy for the back dials is a classic vinyl record player. When you drop the needle on a record, the pin follows a single, continuous groove that slowly spirals toward the center.
The Antikythera mechanism used a very similar concept. A pointer with a small pin on the end would ride inside a spiral groove carved into the bronze.
As the gears turned, the pin would be physically guided outward along the track.
The upper spiral on the back tracks something called the metonic cycle. This is a complex 19-year cycle that consists of 235 lunar months.
So why would the Greeks care about a 19-year cycle? What makes that specific number of lunations so important?
Well, the problem ancient civilizations faced was that a calendar based on the moon does not naturally align with a calendar based on the sun.
They drift apart.
Right. 12 lunar months are roughly 11 days shorter than a single solar year.
Which doesn't sound like much at first.
But if you base your farming and religious festivals purely on lunar months, within a few years, your harvest festival will mathematically drift into the dead of winter. It's an agricultural and societal disaster.
You desperately need a way to synchronize the two calendars.
And ancient astronomers discovered a beautiful mathematical symmetry. Almost exactly every 19 solar years, the phases of the moon will fall on the exact same dates of the solar year. The cycle resets.
Oh, I see.
By tracking the 235 lunar months on this 5-turn spiral dial, the Antikythera mechanism served as the ultimate foolproof tool for keeping the lunar and solar calendars perfectly locked in sync over decades.
So it's basically a master calendar.
Exactly. And below the metonic spiral was a second 4-turn spiral that tracked something even more dramatic, the Saros cycle.
The Saros cycle.
This is an 18.2-year cycle used specifically to predict the likelihood of solar and lunar eclipses.
Eclipses were terrifying events in the ancient world. The sudden darkening of the sun or the blood-red tint of a lunar eclipse were often interpreted as omens from the gods,
signaling the death of kings or impending catastrophic military defeats.
So being able to predict when these omens would occur granted an astronomer immense political and religious power.
Oh, massive power. And the fascinating part about the Saros cycle is that the Greeks didn't invent the math for it.
Wait, they didn't?
No, they actually inherited this knowledge from the Babylonians.
Really?
Yeah. The Babylonians had spent centuries standing on top of ziggurats, staring at the night sky, and painstakingly recording every single eclipse on clay tablets.
Just centuries of raw data collection.
Through brute force data collection over hundreds of years, they recognized the 18.2-year mathematical repetition.
And the Greeks took that massive Babylonian spreadsheet and somehow programmed it into solid bronze gears.
The synthesis of Babylonian arithmetic and Greek geometry in this machine is a testament to the ancient cross-cultural exchange of scientific knowledge.
But nestled right next to these massive cosmic predictive dials is a small subsidiary dial that brings the entire device crashing back down to human reality.
It is known as the games dial.
Amidst dials tracking the orbits of planets, the alignment of the sun and moon, and the terrifying prediction of eclipses, there is a tiny dial whose sole purpose is to tell the user when the Panhellenic athletic festivals are going to take place.
It literally tracks the schedule for the ancient Olympic Games, the Pythian Games, and others.
To a modern observer, placing a stored schedule on a sophisticated astrophysics computer seems absurd.
It would be like launching the James Webb Space Telescope and programming it to also text you when the Super Bowl starts.
That is the perfect analogy.
Yeah.
But when you look at how Greek society functioned, it makes perfect sense. The games were not just casual weekend entertainment.
No, they were the absolute focal point of Greek culture, diplomacy, and religion.
Yeah.
Tony Freeth emphasizes this beautifully in the sources. The Greeks literally paused ongoing bloody wars to participate in these athletic festivals.
A truce was called. Athletes traveled safely across enemy lines, they competed, and when the games were over, they went back to slaughtering each other.
The timing of those festivals was as rigid and sacred as the movement of the stars. To the Greek mind, astronomy, religion, and society were deeply intertwined.
Tracking the Olympics was just as vital to their survival as tracking the harvest cycle.
Understanding what the dials displayed is one thing, But understanding how the internal gears physically manipulated those displays is where the story shifts from brilliant engineering into the realm of the seemingly impossible.
Because the Greek engineers face a massive foundational hurdle, a flaw in their very understanding of the universe.
The geocentric problem.
Right.
The ancient Greeks, despite all their mathematical prowess, operated under the firm philosophical belief that the Earth was the stationary center of the universe.
They believed that everything else, the sun, the moon, and the planets, orbited around us in perfect concentric circles.
It's an understandable human-centric worldview, but from a purely physical standpoint, it is entirely wrong. We are orbiting the sun right alongside the other planets.
And because we are all moving on different orbital tracks at different speeds, viewing another moving planet from a moving Earth creates a bizarre optical illusion in the night sky.
If you track a planet like Mars night after night, it doesn't appear to move in a smooth, continuous circle. Because the Earth is moving faster on its inner track as we, sort of lap Mars in our orbit, Mars appears to slow down in the night sky.
It stops completely.
Right, it stops, and then it actually moves backward for several weeks before stopping again and resuming its forward motion.
This optical illusion is called retrograde motion.
The planets appear to trace these complex, loopy, herky-jerky paths across the stars. And the Greeks had observed this. They possessed decades of observational data.
They knew that Venus had a 462-year synodic period, and Saturn had a 442-year period, tracking the exact time it took for the planets to complete their complex loops and return to the exact same position relative to Earth.
The observational data was perfect, but how do you recreate that erratic motion mechanically?
That's the million-dollar question.
How do you take a single hand crank, turning smoothly in one direction, and force a gear deep inside the machine to spin forward, abruptly stop, reverse itself, and then go forward again?
To solve this mechanical nightmare, the Greek engineers employed a concept known as epicyclic gears.
In the simplest terms, epicyclic gearing involves mounting a smaller gear directly onto the flat face of a larger gear.
Okay, so picture that.
As the main larger gear slowly rotates forward, the smaller gear mounted on top of it is forced to rotate independently.
So if you map the path of a specific point on that smaller gear as it spins while being carried in a larger circle, the resulting geometric line draws a perfect loop-to-loop.
Yes. The combination of the two circular motions beautifully replicates the erratic retrograde motion of the planets.
The mathematical precision required to select the exact number of teeth for both the gear and the epicyclic gear, ensuring the mechanical loop perfectly matches the astronomical loop of a planet like Saturn, is staggering.
And as if that wasn't complicated enough, they tackled an even more subtle celestial problem.
The lunar anomaly.
Yes. The moon does not orbit the Earth in a perfect circle. Its orbit is elliptical.
It moves slightly faster when it is closer to Earth at perigee, and slightly slower when it is farther away at apogee.
And the Greeks noticed this slight variation in speed. To mimic it, they invented something called a slot and pin mechanism.
Describe that because it's brilliant.
The slot and pin is a masterpiece of dynamic engineering. They took two gears and placed them one on top of the other, but they slightly offset their center axes so they weren't perfectly aligned. The bottom gear had a small pin sticking up from its surface, and the top gear had a slot cut into it. The pin from the bottom gear rested inside the slot of the top gear.
As the bottom gear turns at a constant speed, it pushes the pin, which turns the top gear.
But because their centers are offset, the distance between the pin and the center of the top gear constantly changes.
The pin slides back and forth within the slot as the gears spin. When the pin slides closer to the center, the top gear spins faster. When it slides further out, the top gear spins slower.
They literally created a mechanical transmission that accelerates and decelerates the gear to perfectly mimic the elliptical orbit of the moon.
It is arguably the most elegant mechanical solution ever discovered in antiquity. They took abstract mathematical theories about the changing velocities of celestial bodies and forged them into tangible, moving bronze.
It's poetry in metal.
It really is. And, whenever I read about the epicyclic gears and the slot and pin mechanism, I encounter the same frustrating narrative online.
Fringe authors like Eric von Daniken.
Yes. They look at this staggering complexity and claim that primitive humans couldn't possibly have engineered it. They argue the device must have been gifted to the Greeks by extraterrestrial visitors.
Which is just, well, it's lazy.
I find it deeply insulting. It strips humanity of its own brilliant history and implies our ancestors were fundamentally incapable of advanced mathematics.
The scientific community vehemently dismisses the extraterrestrial hypothesis, and for very sound, evidence-based reasons. There is absolutely nothing alien about the Antikythera mechanism.
Every single aspect of it points to a distinctly human origin.
The astronomical theories driving the gears are a direct synthesis of known Greek geometry and Babylonian arithmetic. The epicyclic motion was a well-documented theoretical model debated by Greek philosophers of the era.
Furthermore, the extensive user manual etched into the device is written entirely in ancient Greek, utilizing specific regional dialects and calendar systems.
It is an artifact born purely of human observation, trial, and error.
The math is human. The language is human. The true remaining mystery of the mechanism has nothing to do with aliens.
Right, the real mystery lies in the physical metallurgy and the manufacturing process.
Adam Wojcik, an engineer at UCL who worked extensively on modeling the planetary displays, highlighted this final, glaring puzzle.
The theoretical design of the gear trains is genius, but fabricating the physical components required tools we didn't think the Greeks possessed.
The problem centers on the front dial. If you have a single dial displaying the sun, moon, and 5 planets, you cannot just attach all those hands to a single solid axle. They all move at different speeds.
Exactly. To make that work, you must use a system of concentric hollow tubes.
Meaning,
You need a tiny central axle housed inside a slightly larger hollow tube, housed inside another hollow tube, and so on. Each individual tube connects to a different gear train and drives a different planetary hand on the dial face.
it's essentially a system of microscopic bronze nesting dolls.
The engineering challenge is immense. Wojcik points out that packing all of these nested hollow planetary tubes into a space that is barely 25 millimeters deep is a nightmare of tolerances.
Nearly an inch deep.
Yeah. The tubes have to be perfectly straight and perfectly smooth. If there is even a microscopic button on the inside of a tube, the entire nested assembly will bind together and jam.
If a modern manufacturer were tasked with creating these delicate hollow bronze tubes today, they would clamp a solid rod of metal into a motorized high-speed lathe and use a hardened steel drill bit to bore out the center with absolute precision.
The ancient Greeks did not have motorized metal lathes. They did not have hardened steel bits.
So how did they do it?
That's the thing. How did a craftsman, using only hand tools, forge, drill, and polish these impossibly delicate concentric tubes without them snapping under the pressure or binding together?
Unless archaeologists uncover the physical workshop and the specialized manual tools used by the creator, the physical fabrication of those axles remains the great unsolved mystery of the Antikythera mechanism.
Which naturally leads to the next massive question.
Who built it?
If it wasn't aliens, and it required tools we can't fully comprehend, who exactly was the ancient genius that built this? Who was the Steve Jobs of the 2nd century BC, and where was their workshop located?
Let's dive into the historical detective work here.
The search for the creator begins with linguistic forensics. The text inscribed on the device serves as a geographical tracker.
Paul Iverson, a classicist, heavily analyzed the month names listed on the calendar dials. He discovered that the specific nomenclature used for the months was highly localized.
The names matched those used in the city of Corinth and its various colonies in northwest Greece.
And that geographic footprint is reinforced by the game's dial. It doesn't just list the massive famous events at the Olympics. It includes smaller, highly regional athletic festivals.
It specifically names the Na festival, which was native to northwest Greece, and the Halaea festival, which was celebrated far to the south on the island of Rhodes.
This specific combination of geographic markers suggests a very plausible trade route. The device might have been designed and constructed in a high-end workshop on the island of Rhodes,
Heavily customized with Corinthian month names and regional festival dates.
and then shipped out to a wealthy aristocratic client living in northwest Greece.
When we focus on the island of Rhodes during the era the device was likely built, several massive historical suspects emerge from the shadows.
Suspect number 1 is the philosopher and astronomer Posidonius. He operated a highly renowned scientific workshop on the island of Rhodes during the 1st century BC.
We have compelling circumstantial evidence pointing to him, primarily from the writings of the famous Roman orator Cicero.
Cicero, who was actually alive during the time the Antikythera ship went down, explicitly wrote in his texts that his friend Posidonius had recently constructed a mechanical globe that accurately replicated the complex motions of the sun, moon, and planets.
The description Cicero provides perfectly matches the functionality of the mechanism.
But he's not the only suspect.
No, we also have suspect number 2, the legendary astronomer Hipparchus. Hipparchus lived and worked on roads slightly earlier, around the 2nd century BC.
Hipparchus is a fascinating suspect because he was historically famous for being the individual who formally blended Babylonian mathematical records with Greek geometric theories.
And that synthesis of cultures is the absolute core DNA of the Antikythera mechanism. The fact that the device relies on the Babylonian Saros eclipse cycle heavily points toward the intellectual influence of Hipparchus.
But the list of suspects wouldn't be complete without examining suspect number 3, the most famous inventor of the ancient world, Archimedes.
Now, Archimedes presents a timeline problem. He lived much earlier, back in the 3rd century BC, and his workshop was located in Syracuse, Sicily, not Rhodes.
He died long before the specific shipwreck we're discussing occurred.
The timeline makes it physically impossible for Archimedes to have built the specific bronze device found in the shipwreck. But again, returning to Cicero's writings, Cicero claimed that Archimedes built an original, masterful bronze machine that delineated the motions of the heavens and accounted for the different rates of planetary speed.
So the prevailing theory among many researchers, including Tony Freeth, is a kind of intellectual lineage.
Archimedes may have invented the original prototype, the grandfather of all astronomical computers. That core knowledge was passed down over generations, refined and improved upon, eventually culminating in the advanced version built by someone like Hipparchus or Posidonius in Rhodes.
It's important to note that Alexander Jones, a highly prominent historian of ancient science, urges caution regarding these texts. He argues we shouldn't treat Cicero's poetic and philosophical accounts as literal, blueprint-accurate engineering narratives.
The exact name of the craftsman who held the hammer and cut the gears may forever remain a 2,000-year-old cold case.
While the identity of the builder is debated, there is an even more intense, incredibly specific scholarly debate regarding when the machine was technically turned on.
This start date.
Yes, and this requires a bit of explanation. Every measuring tool in the world requires a 0 point to function properly.
If you are measuring temperature, you need absolute 0 on the Kelvin scale. If you are starting a calendar, you need a day 1.
For an incredibly complex analog computer that tracks cyclical cosmic time, what was its day 1? What was the exact startup date calibrated into the alignment of its gears?
The search for the calibration date has divided the research community into 2 distinct camps, both offering brilliant but conflicting arguments. We have to look at what kind of astronomical and cultural events would justify an ancient astronomer establishing a 0 point.
Theory A is put forward by Aristides Vulgaris and his research team. They argue, based on back-calculating the astronomical events, that the machine's absolute startup date was December 22nd, 178 BC.
Their argument hinges on an incredibly rare, awe-inspiring convergence of cosmic and cultural events.
Vulgaris mathematically demonstrates that on December 22nd, 178 BC, a significant solar eclipse occurred, lasting over 12 minutes.
The very next day marked the winter solstice, which was a day of massive significance for ancient timekeeping.
Simultaneously, a new moon phase began.
And perhaps most importantly for the cultural argument, these cosmic events perfectly coincided with the Aija festival,
A major religious celebration dedicated to the Egyptian goddess Isis, whose worship was widely integrated into Greek culture at the time.
It is the ultimate celestial jackpot. You have the sun blacking out, the longest night of the year, a new moon, and a major religious festival, all stacking up on essentially the exact same day.
Vulgaris makes a beautifully poetic argument. If you are going to calibrate a machine that maps the heavens, you wait for a day when the heavens put on their most spectacular, synchronized show.
You witness that convergence, you physically lock the gears into place, and you base all future calculations from that moment.
The narrative of the 178 BC start date is highly logical from a cultural perspective.
But Theory B, championed by researchers like Alexander Jones, completely discards the poetry and focuses strictly on the cold, hard mathematics locked inside the gear teeth.
Jones argues that the actual start date was May 12th, 204 BC.
The math backing up the 204 BC date is incredibly specific. Jones looks at the sequence carved into the Saros eclipse dial.
Mathematical analysis published in 2014 demonstrated that a specific arithmetic sequence of eclipse predictions computed by the internal gears aligns perfectly and uniquely with a lunar interval that began in May 204 BC.
The mathematical alignment is strong, but Jones bolsters his argument with a deeply practical, earthly piece of evidence. Remember, the mechanism possesses a dial indicating the progression of the seasons.
Right. One of the seasons explicitly inscribed on the bronze is Krineos.
In ancient Greece, the Krineos season was inextricably associated with the late summer grape harvest and the production of wine.
Here is where the 178 BC theory hits a massive wall.
A huge wall.
If you physically calibrate the mechanism's gears to start on Vulgaris's date of December 22nd, 178 BC, and wind the machine forward, the gearing mathematically forces the Krineos grape season to fall in the month of February.
The agricultural discrepancy is impossible to ignore. As any ancient farmer or modern viticulturist knows, February is the dead of winter. It is not a month for harvesting ripe grapes.
A machine that tells farmers to harvest their vineyards in the snow is a broken machine.
Calibrating the gears to start in May, 204 BC, correctly aligns both the mathematical eclipse cycles and the earthly agricultural seasons.
It is a phenomenal debate between the romance of a rare cosmic alignment and the strict, unforgiving realities of mathematics and agriculture. Both theories provide incredible insight into how ancient minds structured their understanding of time.
The amount of hidden data extracted from these corroded fragments is overwhelming. But if we pull the lens back from the intricate gear ratios and the date debates, we can see the massive philosophical shadow this shoebox-sized device casts over the entirety of human history.
Historian Mike Edmonds raises a deeply profound point about what the existence of this machine represents for the evolution of human thought.
It centers on the concept of mechanical philosophy. Prior to this era in human history, natural phenomena were largely viewed through the lens of mythology.
A storm, an eclipse, or an earthquake was the unpredictable whim of an angry or chaotic deity.
But the Antikythera mechanism represents a paradigm shift. The Greeks began to view the universe not as a chaotic battleground of gods, but as an entity operating by predefined, predictable mathematical rules, a system of interlocking gears.
Edmonds asks the ultimate chicken and egg question. Did the engineers build the Antikythera mechanism simply to physically model the astronomical mathematics they had already worked out? Or did the physical existence of this flawless, predictable bronze computer actually inspire the philosophical belief that the universe itself is a giant clockwork mechanism?
Did humanity invent the concept of the clockwork universe, or did observing the gears of this machine teach them how to perceive reality?
The implication is staggering. These ancient scholars weren't merely surviving the natural world, they were mathematically modeling the fundamental fabric of reality, reducing the infinite cosmos into a system of bronze teeth they could hold in the palm of their hands.
The sheer brilliance of what they achieved makes the ultimate fate of this technology entirely heartbreaking. Alexander Jones noted a harsh reality of antiquity. Metal was incredibly expensive and constantly recycled.
When a bronze machine broke, or when the astronomical theories behind it became obsolete, it wasn't carefully placed in a climate-controlled museum. It was thrown into a furnace and melted down.
The bronze was infinitely more valuable than the history it represented. The Antikythera mechanism was not preserved intentionally. It survived purely by suffering a tragedy.
The merchant ship carrying it was ripped apart by a storm and sank to the freezing, inaccessible bottom of the sea, effectively hiding the device from the scrap heap and the recycling furnaces for 2 millennia.
Which leaves us with a deeply unsettling, provocative thought.
The Antikythera mechanism is just one object that happened to fall off one ship.
Yeah.
If ancient engineers were capable of building a hand-cranked cosmic supercomputer to track the moon's elliptical orbit, what else was in their workshops?
What other impossible ancient technologies, what other towering leaps of human imagination were simply melted down to forge bronze swords, punch coins, or build plumbing systems?
We base our understanding of human progress only on the artifacts that managed to escape destruction. The history we know is simply the history that survived the furnace.
It is a terrifying thought that we may have reached the absolute peak of technological brilliance multiple times in our past, only to casually recycle it and start entirely over.
We began today by asking you to imagine holding a misshapen green lump of corroded bronze, a heavy rock covered in calcified mold. The next time you walk through a museum, or even just look at something old, broken, or seemingly unremarkable, think of the sponge divers in 1900. Sometimes the most earth-shattering paradigm shifts in human history are hiding quietly, right beneath the surface, disguised as debris, just waiting for us to look closely enough.